widely reported that Donald Trump's decision to send American troops to the US-Mexico border in response to migrant asylum seekers was nothing more than a political stunt for the midterms. Now, I shared evidence of that on No Filter last week. One piece of evidence was that members of the military were legally barred from using any force at the border in the first place. But behind the scenes, Trump and his more hawkish political advisors have been fighting to change that. And it appears that, unfortunately, they've been successful. According to Politico, a fiery debate among cabinet officials ended with a new cabinet order granting the troops deployed at the southern border the right to use lethal force to defend Border Patrol agents. The declaration vests HHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen with the power to request military action to protect US Customs and Border Protection agents. For what it's worth, there were a few people within the administration who understood that this new order could be, unconstitutional. I mean, they did little to stop its implementation, but at least they know that what they're doing is likely wrong, I guess. White House Chief of Staff John Kelly and Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen initially argued against signing the declaration, but they were vocally opposed by, among others, Senior Policy Advisor Stephen Miller. Kelly and Nielsen eventually came around to the president's position, and the bitter dispute ended with Kelly, who signed a cabinet declaration granting the military disputed authority. The unconstitutionality of the move was noted by legal experts who argue that it violates a federal law that prohibits the US military from acting as a law enforcement agency on American soil. But it's not like the Trump administration really cares that much about all these pesky laws or the Constitution, especially when fear-mongering is needed to help with Trump's sinking approval rating. The administration argues that Border Patrol agents need protection from incoming migrants, the vast majority of whom are actually nonviolent and are running away from violence. Jorge Montoya, who's one of those migrants, told NBC, quote, "We're not running because we're criminals. We're running from the crime in our own country." The idea that cops at the border would need the military to protect them with the possible use of lethal force makes no sense. But it turns out that the administration was planning ahead for even more draconian immigration policies, which unfortunately did escalate violence at the border over the weekend. News broke over the weekend that the US closed a major port of entry near San Diego.
On Sunday, the Trump administration closed the San Ysidro port of entry between San Diego and Tijuana for a period of time, citing large numbers of migrants, some of whom tried to breach the fence, while others threw projectiles. In response, US Border Patrol officers fired tear gas canisters at some of the migrants. DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen writing, "DHS will not tolerate this type of lawlessness." Hans Nichols was in Tijuana when migrants stormed the border.
There are hundreds of migrants here who have left their squalid camp and are trying to make it towards the border, towards an official point of entry. But stopping them, Mexican federal police here, it is going to prevent them from reaching their goal.
Now remember that ports of entry happen to be one of the few ways for immigrants to legally enter the country and seek asylum. Trump has been arguing over and over again that he's only targeting people who enter the country illegally. Clearly, he's lying about that. Also, the Trump administration's move to shut down the port of entry was in response to a major disagreement with Mexico's government. Trump had claimed he had reached a deal with Mexican officials over incoming asylum seekers. But as usual, his assertions were far from true.
Over the weekend, the president indicated the new asylum policy is a done deal, tweeting, "Migrants at the southern border will not be allowed into the United States until their claims are individually approved in court." But a top Mexican official contradicted the president, saying no agreement had been reached. President Trump also threatened to close the entire US border if the situation worsens.
Trump's decision to shut down the border only made things worse. The Washington Post reports that US authorities fired tear gas at members of the Central American migrant caravan who had rushed the fencing that separates the countries. Migrants attempting to climb fences and run through car lanes, and scenes of mothers and children choking on tear gas represented a serious escalation of the crisis. Again, I just want to reiterate that these migrants wanted to enter the country legally through a port of entry. Again, that is the legal way of seeking asylum. By shutting down the border, by closing this main port of entry, the Trump administration essentially gave these migrants a giant middle finger as they were attempting to follow the law. Luckily, the port of entry was reopened shortly after 6 p.m. And the migrants said they tried crossing the border only after being denied access to the only legal way of entering the country, which again is through a port of entry. Now, Trump is threatening to permanently shut down the border if he doesn't get everything he wants from Mexico's government. Even if you consider yourself a fan of Trump's hardline immigration policies, you have to take a moment, just one moment, to analyze whether he's been successful or counterproductive. The reality is that Trump has only made the immigration problem worse and costlier for Americans. For instance, we now have a record number of unaccompanied minors in custody.
Department of Health and Human Services says the latest number has now reached 14,000 unaccompanied children. That shatters the highest number from just 2 months ago. Ed Lavandera is with me now. And Ed, 14,000. Why is that number so high?
Well, there are a number of factors playing into all of this, but by all accounts, it really seems to be because of major policy changes that the Trump administration has been implementing in recent months, even dating back to this summer when the family separation issue exploded into such a major and controversial issue across the country. But essentially, what CNN reporting is showing over the last few months is that fewer children are being released, and many more children being held for longer periods of time.
Part of the reason these minors are in US custody is because the Trump administration oftentimes refuses to let them go when sponsors come forward and offer to take custody. According to CNN, the administration moved last spring to better scrutinize adults coming forward, which includes exhaustive screening conducted by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Many of the adults who take care of these kids are actually undocumented themselves and fearful of ICE getting their information. But maybe detaining record numbers of undocumented minors isn't considered a bug for Trump. Maybe it's a feature, especially when considering the profit motive behind it. For-profit prisons, which are funded through our taxes, are making a killing off of these nonsensical immigration policies. The more bodies they can get into their detention facilities, the more they stand to profit. There's also an upcoming fight regarding Trump's border wall and whether the next spending bill will appropriate the funds necessary to build it. Trump argues that he won't sign any government spending bill unless it gives him the money he wants for the wall. I mean, I thought Mexico was gonna pay for it. Kind of strange, right? But it looks like US taxpayers who keep getting denied universal health care because it's allegedly too expensive will have to fork over the cash. So how much? According to Fast Company, the US Government Accountability Office found that neither Donald Trump nor the US Customs and Border Protection Agency has a clue about how much the border wall with Mexico will actually cost. Oh wow, what a shocker. They didn't do the research necessary to figure out how much this was gonna cost. Now, Customs and Border Patrol didn't analyze the cost of putting barriers in each potential location. These costs can actually vary depending on topography, land ownership, and other factors. Yeah. So in February of 2017, a leaked report by the Department of Homeland Security estimated that the border wall could cost nearly $22 billion. All of this for a wall that won't work to stop undocumented immigrants from entering the country. The Department of Homeland Security reported that successful illegal entries at the border fell 91% between 2000 and 2016. These days, most of the undocumented immigrants enter the country legally and overstay their visas, something that Trump hasn't focused on. Maybe because all this commotion at the border is yet another sad political stunt. More red meat for Trump's rabid base at the expense of desperate people seeking safety. Did you know that TYT Network is now available on YouTube's new streaming platform, YouTube TV? Get access to full TYT episodes and exclusive shows by signing up for YouTube TV today. All new subscribers get a 7-day free trial, so head over to youtube.tv and search for the TYT Network channel.